All right, in this session, we'll talk about greenhouse gas protocol standard. As I mentioned earlier, it's the most widely used standard for estimating emissions, carbon footprint emissions. And this is, greenhouse gas protocol was developed as a partnership between World Resources Institute and World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And it provides, as I told you, a framework to measure and manage greenhouse gas emissions. It doesn't provide you emission factors, but it does tell you how to calculate and what should be the uh, way to estimate emissions. But it wouldn't provide you with exact emission factors or formulas. And the GHG protocol also provides online training. So these trainings are also available for people if you want to attend those. These are paid training. And then a lot of companies, like it's mentioned, more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies are reporting using greenhouse gas protocol. I will quickly walk you through its website because it has very important resources and it's important to have a look at it. Okay, so as you see, this is the website of GHG protocol. So it's ghgprotocol.org, and it has different standards for different types of carbon footprint estimations. Corporate standard on the left-hand side, corporate value chain standard, policy and action standard, mitigation goal standards. For different usage, they have different standards that have been developed. We'll go through them briefly in a while. And they have also provided additional guidance on how to calculate scope 2 emissions, scope 3 emissions. Those kind of guidances are also available. And they also provide calculation tools, but many of these tools are not, country specific, and many of these are locked as well. So you wouldn't be able to either see the formula or make any changes, and in some cases you wouldn't be able to see the emission factors as well. So these tools are still usable, and if you have any specific purpose, for example, they have specific tools for transport related emissions. So you can go through the website and see what tools they have, and you can use these tools as a supplemental tool that we are providing in order to estimate emissions. Then they also provide online training on different types of, on different aspects of greenhouse gas inventory management. So that's corporate standard training, monitoring, reporting, and verification standards training. So all those kind of trainings are available. Most of these are paid trainings. You can look at their calendar, and in future, if you're interested, you can obviously participate in these. The GHG protocol has 7 standards of different types. The first one is, let me change the slide. Okay. All right, before we go into the standard, there are some common principles that GHG protocol, advises people to keep in mind when they are preparing their greenhouse gas inventory. The first one is relevance. What it says is we must ensure that the greenhouse gas inventory appropriately reflects the greenhouse gas emissions of the company and serves the decision makers' need. So when you are creating an inventory, you must understand why are you creating it. Are you creating it to probably develop a target? Are you creating it to understand how much is your emission and to present it to your management so that they can look at it and understand their environmental impact and take some action? So you need to understand the reason behind creating it, and that's how you would be able to report it in a manner so that it suits the end user's need. And then the second principle is completeness. So we should account for and report on all greenhouse gas emission sources and activity within the boundary that we have chosen. And if we are excluding any of these, then we must include the exclusions and mention the reason. Like yesterday, I had said that you may exclude insignificant emissions. Anything if it's below 5% or 2% of your entire greenhouse gas inventory, then you can exclude it. And that could be one of the reasons to provide in your greenhouse gas inventory report, mentioning that we are excluding few of these sources. Or there could be reasons where you do not have data to calculate such emissions, and you might have just embarked on the journey to create greenhouse gas inventory. So those kind of things could also be excluded, but you have to transparently mention it if you are reporting it to your stakeholders. Then consistency. So we need to use consistent methodologies and transparently document any changes to the data or the boundary, or disclose any methodological changes in calculating the emissions, or if you're changing the tools in calculating the emissions, or if you're updating, say, let's say, emission factors, because emission factors keep on changing specifically for grid and others. So they might get updated depending on the change in the mix of power plants in the grid system. So you need to, transparently and consistently use similar methodology. And if there is any change, then you need to report that as well. Then transparency. So any assumptions and any references that you must make for disclosing your emissions must be provided in the carbon footprint report. So if in our Excel sheet as well, if you will see when we share it with you, we have tried to provide you with all the references from where we are taking the emission factors or calorific values and so on. So it's very important to provide all the references and sources transparently so that people can access it and understand if there's any limitation to those emission factors. Like yesterday, I think some of the participants were also mentioning that the emission factors for the air travel are not exact. They might have some error, which is fine, which is correct, because we do not have actual data of each flight and we do not have actual occupancy of each flight. So these are approximations. But it's important to mention in your document where did you take these emission factors from, so that someone can refer to it and understand if it's a credible source or not. Then accuracy is one of the important parameters. We need to ensure that the quantification of greenhouse gas emissions is neither over nor under actual emissions as far as can be judged. So the judgment factor is always there, because we are not measuring these emissions through a meter, right? We are calculating it based on emission factors and activity data. So these would never be like 100% on the target, but yes, objectively it should be neither under reported or over reported. So these are the few principles that GHG protocol recommends that we should keep in mind when we are preparing a GHG inventory. The first standard and the most widely used standard that we have here is corporate standard. Yes, so we have a question from Mr. Saeed on what will be the level of accuracy which is accepted. Plus minus 5% is definitely one of the most common, accepted level of accuracy when you talk about any kind of assurance or validation activity. So that you are right. So plus minus 5% is something that is acceptable. Coming back to the reporting standards, so corporate reporting standard is specifically for corporates and organizations, and it provides you the guidance specifically for companies to prepare your greenhouse gas inventory. The next one that GHG protocol has is protocol for community scale greenhouse gas emission inventory. So this is specifically for cities, because cities are responsible for more than 70% of greenhouse gas emissions and the almost the same quantity of energy related emissions. Now, for tackling the challenges that one has in estimating emissions for cities, because it would have a lot of underlying assumptions and a lot of different variety of sources, and there could be issue of double counting. So that's why they have developed a separate standard for community scale greenhouse gas emissions. The next one is project GHG accounting. So if you want to specifically assess what would be the carbon footprint of your project, what could be the reduction that your project would achieve, then this is the standard that one must look into. It will provide you broad guidelines on that. And if you're also looking into, comparing different types of projects, and you have different options, then you can create the inventory for these projects separately, and then decide on which one would be beneficial for you in terms of the GHG reduction. Then there's specific accounting standard for scope 3 value chain or supply chain, which deals into all the requirements that you must meet when you are transparently calculating estimations for your supply chain, for example, products that you use or outsourced emissions that we talked about. So it's specifically focused on scope 3 emissions. Then mitigation goal standard. So this standard is specifically for government authorities and to develop, state level or national level greenhouse gas inventories. And these could be used to report the country level emissions to United Nations. Several countries create their greenhouse gas inventory and report to the United Nations. And this is one of the standards that can be used to develop such national level inventories. Then product life cycle accounting and reporting standard is specific for a product. We discussed yesterday about embodied energy, wherein we talked about energy that's consumed right from sourcing the raw material in the mines up till the transportation and delivery to the end user. And some cases, the usage by the consumer is also included in it. So it provides you a guideline on how to estimate the carbon footprint of the product. Again, policy in action is mostly used by government bodies to understand what will be the effect of a particular policy which they are planning to implement.